I never expected a parking dispute would lead to the most ridiculous power struggle of my life, but in Meadowbrook Estates, the HOA had a way of turning mundane issues into all-out warfare. The text message from my neighbor came through at 7:03 a.m. "Dude, there's a notice on your truck. And Karen's taking pictures." I groaned and rolled out of bed. My name is Ian Calloway, and 6 months ago, I'd moved into what I thought was a perfect neighborhood in suburban Columbus, Ohio. The houses were well maintained, the streets clean, and the location was just 15 minutes from my office. What the realtor failed to mention was that the homeowners association was run by a tyrant named Patricia Wilson, who everyone called HOA Patricia behind her back. I threw on a t-shirt and jeans, not bothering to comb my hair, and rushed outside. Sure enough, a bright orange violation notice was stuck to my windshield. Standing a few feet away, Patricia Wilson herself was documenting my apparent transgression with her smartphone. She was in her mid-50s, with a blonde bob haircut that looked like it had been measured with a ruler, and wore what I'd come to recognize as her unofficial uniform: khaki capri pants and a polo shirt with the Meadowbrook Estates logo embroidered on the chest. "Morning, Patricia," I called out, trying to keep my voice friendly despite the early hour. She lowered her phone and gave me a look that could have frozen lava. "Mr. Calloway, this is your third parking violation this month. Residents are not permitted to park commercial vehicles in their driveways overnight." I glanced at my pickup truck. It was a Ford F-150 that I used occasionally for work, but it hardly qualified as a commercial vehicle in my mind. "It's just my personal truck," I explained. "I use it sometimes for work, but it has your company logo on the door," she interrupted, pointing to the small magnetic sign for my construction business. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that no commercial vehicles may be parked in residential driveways between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. You can read it yourself in Section 7, Paragraph 3. I had actually read it several times, and I was pretty sure Patricia was misinterpreting the rule, which was meant to prevent semi-trucks and commercial vans from cluttering the neighborhood. "Look," I said, trying to be reasonable, "I'll remove the magnetic sign when I'm home if that helps, but I need my truck." Patricia's lips thinned into a tight line. "That won't be sufficient. You'll need to park it elsewhere or face escalating fines. The current violation is $75, but it will increase to $150 for the next offense." I pulled the notice off my windshield and read it. Sure enough, it cited the exact bylaw Patricia had mentioned. "Where exactly am I supposed to park it?" I asked. She gestured vaguely down the street. "The commercial lot at the entrance of the subdivision is designated for such vehicles. You can't park there." That was the final straw. "Actually, Patricia, I think I can," I smiled, which seemed to unnerve her slightly. "I own that parking lot." Her expression froze. "Excuse me. I purchased the commercial lot at the entrance of Meadowbrook last month. My company's expanding and we needed the space." This wasn't entirely true. I had purchased the lot, but not for my company's expansion. The truth was more complicated and would soon become Patricia Wilson's worst nightmare. When I'd first moved in, I'd heard rumors that the previous owner of my house had been essentially forced out by the HOA after a series of escalating disputes. The more I learned about Meadowbrook's HOA, the more concerned I became. So I'd done some digging into the neighborhood's history and property records. What I discovered was fascinating. The commercial lot at the entrance, while within the boundaries of Meadowbrook Estates, had never actually been included in the HOA's jurisdiction. It was a separate parcel that had been owned by the original developer, who had gone bankrupt 10 years ago. Since then, it had passed through several owners, most recently a holding company that was looking to offload it quickly. I'd purchased it for a surprisingly reasonable sum, sensing it might come in handy someday. That day had apparently arrived sooner than expected. Patricia's face had gone from frozen to flushed. "That's impossible. That lot belongs to the association." "It doesn't actually," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'd be happy to email you the property records if you'd like. But in the meantime, I guess I'll just keep parking in my driveway since the alternative you suggested isn't viable." Patricia looked like she was about to argue further, but then seemed to think better of it. "We'll discuss this at the next board meeting," she said stiffly, before turning on her heel and marching back to her house 3 doors down. I knew this wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Over the next week, I received no fewer than 5 additional violation notices for various alleged infractions. My grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. My trash bins had been returned to the side of my house 20 minutes too late. The color of my garden hose, dark green, wasn't on the approved color list. Only forest green or earth brown were permitted. It was petty harassment, plain and simple. But I had anticipated this reaction and was already putting my plan into motion. The commercial lot I'd purchased was approximately half an acre, paved with asphalt and surrounded by a chain-link fence. It had once served as overflow parking for visitors and as a designated spot for commercial vehicles. For years, it had sat mostly empty, used occasionally by residents who needed temporary extra parking. The HOA had effectively treated it as community property, despite not actually owning it. On Saturday morning, I met with Aaron Rodriguez, my attorney and friend since college. We sat at my kitchen table reviewing documents while I filled him in on the situation. "So let me get this straight," Aaron said, tapping a stack of papers. "You bought this lot specifically because you suspected the HOA might give you trouble," I shrugged. "Not specifically for that, but I saw it as insurance. I do commercial construction, Aaron. Having a secure lot close to home is useful. And now you want to what? Turn it into a fortress just to spite this Patricia woman." "Not a fortress," I clarified. "I'm just going to exercise my rights as the property owner. The lot isn't subject to HOA regulations. I've confirmed that with county records. It's zoned for commercial use, and I intend to use it." Aaron sighed. "Just be careful. HOAs can make your life miserable if they want to." "They're already trying," I said, "but they picked the wrong guy to bully." On Monday morning, I filed for the necessary permits to install a security gate at the entrance to the parking lot. By Wednesday, a work crew had arrived to begin installation. I had chosen a heavy-duty automatic gate with keypad entry, complete with security cameras that would feed directly to my phone. It didn't take long for word to spread through the neighborhood. By noon, Patricia Wilson was standing at the edge of the lot, hands on her hips, watching the construction with undisguised horror. I decided to take the initiative and walked over to her. "Afternoon, Patricia. Something I can help you with." "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Installing a security gate," I replied calmly. "It's a liability issue. Can't have unauthorized vehicles parking here." "This lot has always been open to the community," she insisted. "As a courtesy by the previous owners, perhaps, but I have different plans for it." "The board will not approve these modifications." I smiled. "The board doesn't have jurisdiction over this property. It's not part of the HOA's covenant. I've already confirmed that with the county and obtained all necessary permits." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." "The annual HOA meeting is next week. I suggest you attend." "Wouldn't miss it," I assured her. The gate was completed in 2 days, and I immediately changed the access protocol. Only I had the code, though I planned to eventually share it with a few trusted neighbors who'd been friendly to me since I moved in. The following Tuesday evening, I walked into the community center where the annual HOA meeting was being held. The room was packed with about 60 residents, many of whom I recognized but hadn't yet met formally. I took a seat near the back, nodding to a few familiar faces. Patricia Wilson sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members. She called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m. and proceeded through a series of routine reports and updates that seemed designed to bore everyone into submission. Finally, she reached new business, and her gaze locked onto me like a targeting system. "I'd like to address a situation that has developed concerning the commercial parking area at the entrance to our community," she announced. "For those who haven't noticed, a resident has claimed ownership of this property and installed an unauthorized gate restricting access to what has historically been a community resource." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Therefore," Patricia continued, "the board proposes to initiate legal proceedings to assert the association's easement rights over this property and to demand the immediate removal of the gate." A middle-aged man in the front row raised his hand. "How much is that going to cost us in legal fees?" Patricia looked uncomfortable. "We have a legal fund set aside for such matters. Our attorney estimates initial costs at approximately $15,000, with additional the room erupted in protests." Clearly, the prospect of increased HOA fees to fund a legal battle wasn't popular. I raised my hand and waited to be acknowledged. Patricia looked like she'd rather ignore me, but too many people had seen me. "Yes, Mr. Calloway," she said with obvious reluctance. I stood up. "I'd just like to clarify a few points. First, I legally purchased the commercial lot in question last month. The property records clearly show it was never part of the HOA's jurisdiction. Second, I obtained all necessary permits for the gate installation. And third, I'm more than willing to discuss controlled access for residents who need occasional parking. I just don't want commercial trucks from outside the neighborhood using it as a free parking spot." A woman in her 30s spoke up before Patricia could respond. "Why can't we just work out an arrangement? If Mr. Calloway owns the lot, maybe he'd be willing to lease spaces to the HOA for visitor parking." Patricia looked like she'd swallowed something sour. "The association shouldn't have to pay for what we've always had access to." "Except you never actually had a legal right to it," I pointed out. "The previous owners simply didn't enforce their property rights." Another resident, an older man I'd seen walking his dog in the mornings, stood up. "I've lived here for 12 years, and I've got to say, the HOA has been getting more restrictive every year. If Mr. Calloway legally owns that lot, I don't see why we should spend thousands fighting him instead of just working with him." The tide of the room was clearly turning in my favor, which seemed to infuriate Patricia. "This is precisely the kind of non-conformity that reduces property values," she declared. "Next thing you know, he'll be turning it into a junkyard or a commercial storage facility." I shook my head. "I have no intention of doing anything that would negatively impact the neighborhood. I live here too, remember." After nearly an hour of heated discussion, a vote was called. The board's proposal to initiate legal proceedings was defeated by a significant margin. Patricia looked like she might spontaneously combust. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached me to introduce themselves. Many seemed relieved that someone had finally stood up to Patricia, though they were careful not to say so too loudly. One of them, a retired professor named Martin Kelly, shook my hand vigorously. "Good for you, son. That woman's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. About time someone pushed back." I thanked him and made my way to the exit, feeling Patricia's glare burning into my back the entire time. The next morning, I was loading tools into my truck when Patricia appeared at the end of my driveway, accompanied by a stern-looking man in a suit. "Mr. Calloway," she called out. "This is Jeffrey Barnes, the association's attorney. He has some questions for you." I set down the toolbox I was holding. "Good morning to you too, Patricia. Mr. Barnes." Barnes stepped forward. "Mr. Calloway, I've been reviewing the situation regarding the commercial lot. While you may indeed hold the deed, there's a question of prescriptive easement that could give the association rights to the property based on historical use." I smiled. "I figured you might try that angle. That's why I had my attorney research it thoroughly before I purchased the lot. For a prescriptive easement to exist, the use would need to be continuous, open, notorious, and adverse to the owner's interests for the statutory period. But the previous owners gave explicit permission for occasional use, which negates the adverse requirement. Plus, we're in Ohio, where the statutory period is 21 years, and the lot has only existed for 15. Barnes blinked, clearly not expecting such a detailed response from a construction guy. Patricia wasn't deterred. "We have other options. The board has authorized me to offer to purchase the lot from you." "I'm not interested in selling," I replied. "We're prepared to offer 15% above your purchase price," Barnes added. I laughed. "Not even close to tempting. But I am willing to discuss a limited use agreement that would allow residents to access the lot under certain conditions." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue further, but Barnes placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Perhaps we should discuss those conditions." "Would you be available for a meeting later this week?" I nodded. "Sure. But in the meantime, the gate stays and the lot remains private property." They left, Patricia visibly seething and Barnes looking thoughtful. That evening, I received an email from Barnes requesting a formal meeting. I forwarded it to Aaron and asked him to attend with me. 2 days later, we sat across from Barnes and the entire HOA board in the community center's conference room. I laid out my proposal. I would provide access codes to residents who registered their vehicles with me and signed a simple liability waiver. In exchange, the HOA would acknowledge my ownership and drop any claims to the property. Patricia immediately objected. "This is extortion. You're holding community property hostage." Aaron, ever the diplomat, interjected. "My client purchased the property in good faith and has every legal right to control access. The fact that he's willing to work out an arrangement at all is a gesture of goodwill." The other board members seemed more receptive than Patricia. One of them, a woman named Margaret Chen, asked, "Would there be any cost to residents for this access?" "No," I replied. "I'm not looking to profit from my neighbors. I just want control over who uses the lot and when. And I want the harassment to stop." "Harassment?" Patricia snapped. "The association is simply enforcing the rules that everyone agreed to when they purchased property in Meadowbrook. Rules that you selectively enforce," I countered. "I've documented every violation notice I've received since our first interaction about my truck. Prior to that, I didn't receive a single one, despite nothing changing about my property maintenance." Barnes, sensing that the meeting was devolving, suggested a recess. As the board members huddled at the far end of the room, Aaron leaned over to me. "They're going to counter," he whispered. "Stay firm on ownership, but you might need to bend on some of the access details." When the discussion resumed, Margaret took the lead instead of Patricia, which I found interesting. "We appreciate your willingness to work with the community," Margaret said. "We'd like to propose a formal agreement where the HOA manages the access registration process. And in return, We'll set aside a portion of the lot for residents' overflow parking. It was a reasonable compromise, and after some back and forth on the details, we tentatively agreed to have our respective attorneys draft an agreement for review. Patricia remained silent throughout the remainder of the meeting, which was more unsettling than her usual argumentative stance. As we were leaving, Aaron whispered, "Watch your back. She's not done." He was right. The next morning, I arrived at the commercial lot to find Patricia standing by the gate with two men in uniforms from the city's code enforcement department. "Mr. Calloway," one of the officers said, "we've received a complaint about unauthorized commercial activity at this location. We need to inspect the premises." I maintained my composure. "Of course, officers. May I see the inspection order?" The officer handed me an official-looking document, which I reviewed carefully. "This appears to be an order," I said, opening the gate with my remote. "Though I'm curious about the nature of the complaint, since there's no commercial activity happening here yet." The second officer glanced at Patricia, who was watching with barely concealed satisfaction. "The complaint alleges that you're operating an unauthorized parking business without proper licensing." I laughed. "I haven't charged anyone a dime for parking. The gate was installed for security, not to collect fees." The officers conducted a thorough inspection, finding nothing that violated any codes. As they prepared to leave, Patricia intercepted them. "Did you check the drainage system?" she asked. "I'm concerned that it doesn't meet current environmental standards." The first officer looked uncomfortable. "Madam, our inspection was limited to the scope of the complaint. If you have additional concerns, you'll need to file a separate report." Patricia's face reddened. "This is unacceptable. That lot has always been available to the community, and now he's restricting access illegally." "Property ownership isn't within our jurisdiction," the officer replied diplomatically. "That would be a civil matter." After they left, Patricia remained, her arms crossed. "This isn't over, Calloway." "It could be," I said reasonably. "We were making progress in yesterday's meeting before you decided to call in the code enforcers." "I'm just getting started," she warned, before stalking off toward her house. True to her word, Patricia escalated her campaign. Over the next 2 weeks, I received visits from the health department, investigating an anonymous complaint about standing water; the fire marshal, checking if the gate created an access issue for emergency vehicles; and even animal control, responding to a report of a wild animal trapped within the fenced area. Each inspection found nothing wrong, but the harassment was becoming tiresome. Meanwhile, negotiations with the HOA board had stalled, with Patricia apparently convincing enough members to back away from our tentative agreement. I decided it was time to change tactics. The following Saturday, I installed a large sign at the entrance to the lot. "Private property Meadowbrook commercial parking authorized vehicles only towing enforced for access inquiries. 614-555-0127. The phone number led to a dedicated voicemail where residents could request access codes. By Sunday evening, I had received over 30 messages, which I promptly responded to with temporary codes and registration forms. By Monday morning, word had spread through the neighborhood. Residents who had previously been afraid to cross Patricia were now openly using the lot with my permission. Patricia, predictably, was livid. She confronted me as I was checking the security cameras at the lot entrance. "You're undermining the authority of the board," she accused. I shrugged. "I'm exercising my rights as a property owner. The board had its chance to reach an agreement." "We're filing a lawsuit," she declared. "The board voted last night in emergency session." "Really? All 5 members?" Patricia hesitated. "It was a majority decision." which means at least 2 members sided with you, I noted. Interesting, since I spoke with Margaret Chen yesterday, and she seemed unaware of any emergency meeting. Patricia's expression confirmed my suspicion. She was bluffing, or worse, acting without proper board authorization. "You're dividing the community," she said, changing tactics. "No, Patricia, you are. I've had dozens of neighbors thank me for providing them with a secure place to park their extra vehicles or have guests park when visiting. The only person who seems to have a problem with this arrangement is you." She jabbed a finger at my chest. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been running this HOA for 12 years, and I've dealt with plenty of troublemakers like you." "Is that why the previous owner of my house left?" I asked innocently. "Because he was a troublemaker." Patricia's face paled slightly. "That's none of your business." "Actually, it is. I've been talking to him. Thomas Reeves, right? Moved to Cincinnati after living here for 8 years. He had quite a lot to say about his experience with the HOA under your leadership." This wasn't entirely true. I had tracked down Thomas Reeves and left him a message, but we hadn't connected yet. Patricia didn't need to know that. "Whatever he told you is a lie," she snapped, but there was a new wariness in her eyes. "We'll see," I said. "In the meantime, I'll continue operating my property as I see fit." Patricia left without another word, but the look she gave me promised that our conflict was far from over. That evening, I finally received a call back from Thomas Reeves. Our conversation was illuminating, to say the least. "So you're the poor soul who bought my old place," he said with a chuckle. "How's Patricia treating you?" I filled him in on the parking lot dispute. "That sounds about right," Thomas sighed. "She started targeting me after I questioned some financial irregularities in the HOA budget at a meeting. Suddenly, I was getting violation notices for everything imaginable." "Financial irregularities?" I asked, my interest piqued. "Yeah. The association had hired a landscaping company at well above market rates. I did some digging and discovered the company was owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. When I raised concerns about the conflict of interest, the harassment began. Did you ever report it to the board? They were all in Patricia's pocket back then. Eventually, it just became easier to move. My wife couldn't take the stress anymore." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table thinking. If Patricia had abused her position once, there was a good chance she'd done it multiple times. Perhaps it was time to do some investigating of my own. The next day, I filed a formal request with the HOA for financial records going back 5 years, citing Ohio state law that required homeowners associations to make such records available to members upon request. I also reached out to several former residents who had moved away during Patricia's tenure as board president. Patricia's response was swift. That evening, a process server delivered a lawsuit naming me as defendant. The HOA was suing me for creating a nuisance and improperly restricting access to community resources. The complaint sought an injunction requiring me to remove the gate and provide unrestricted access to the parking lot. I immediately forwarded the documents to Aaron, who called me within the hour. "This is weak," he said after reviewing the complaint. "They're claiming prescriptive easement again, despite the clear legal hurdles. And get this, they're claiming that your purchase of the property was invalid because you supposedly knew of the community's interest in it and acted in bad faith." "That's ridiculous," I said. "I bought it through a standard real estate transaction from a holding company that had owned it for years." "Exactly. But here's what's interesting: the complaint isn't signed by the HOA's usual attorney, Jeffrey Barnes. It's signed by someone named William Wilson." "Wilson? Any relation to Patricia?" "That's what I'm wondering. I'll do some checking." 2 days later, Aaron confirmed what I had suspected. William Wilson was Patricia's husband, a real estate attorney who rarely handled litigation. More importantly, the lawsuit had been filed without a formal vote by the full HOA board. Armed with this information, I attended the next regular board meeting. When the agenda reached new business, I raised my hand. I'd like to address the lawsuit that's been filed against me, supposedly on behalf of the association, I said when recognized. Patricia tried to cut me off. That matter is now in litigation and can't be discussed publicly. Actually, I countered, as a member of the association being sued by the association, I have every right to question whether proper procedures were followed in initiating this litigation. Margaret Chen looked confused. What lawsuit are you referring to? A murmur ran through the room. Clearly, not everyone was aware of Patricia's actions. On Tuesday, I was served with a lawsuit filed in the name of Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, seeking an injunction regarding the commercial lot I own, I explained. The complaint was signed by William Wilson as counsel for the plaintiff. Margaret turned to Patricia. We didn't vote on this. The board needs to approve any legal action. Patricia's face flushed. It was an emergency measure under my authority as president. The full board will vote retroactively to approve it tonight. Another board member, James Foster, shook his head. That's not how it works, Patricia. The bylaws clearly state that litigation requires a majority vote of the board before it's initiated, except in cases of immediate danger to property or persons. This is an emergency, Patricia insisted. He's restricting access to community property. It's not community property, I pointed out. That's the whole issue. And there's another problem. The attorney who filed the lawsuit is related to the board president, which represents a clear conflict of interest. The room erupted in angry voices. Some residents were shouting questions at Patricia, while others were demanding answers from the other board members. James Foster called for order, then addressed Patricia directly. Did you authorize your husband to file this lawsuit without board approval? Patricia's silence was damning. Foster turned to the other board members. I move that we immediately withdraw the lawsuit and issue a formal apology to Mr. Calloway. Margaret quickly seconded the motion. The vote was 3-1, with only Patricia opposed and one member abstaining. As the meeting continued, I requested the floor once more. While I appreciate the board's decision to withdraw the improper lawsuit, I believe there are deeper issues that need to be addressed. I've been researching the association's financial records and have found some concerning patterns. I distributed copies of a document I'd prepared, highlighting several questionable expenditures over the past 5 years. These included the landscaping contract with Patricia's brother-in-law's company, a roof repair service owned by her cousin that had been paid significantly above market rates, and consulting fees to a property management advisor who shared Patricia's home address. What we have here appears to be a pattern of self-dealing and conflicts of interest that have cost this community tens of thousands of dollars, I concluded. The room was dead silent as residents reviewed the evidence I'd presented. Patricia had gone pale. This is slander, she finally sputtered. I'll sue you personally for defamation. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, Aaron said, standing up from his seat near the back. And every expenditure listed in that document is backed by the association's own records, which Mr. Calloway legally obtained. James Foster cleared his throat. In light of these allegations, I move that we immediately suspend Patricia Wilson from her position as board president, pending a full investigation, and that we retain an independent auditor to review the association's finances. The motion passed unanimously, with Patricia abstaining. As the meeting adjourned, residents crowded around me, some offering thanks, others sharing their own stories of Patricia's tyrannical rule. Margaret Chen pulled me aside. "You've done this community a service," she said quietly. "But be careful. Patricia won't go down without a fight." She was right, of course. The next morning, I woke to find my truck had been vandalized. All 4 tires had been slashed, and someone had keyed a crude message into the driver's side door. "Go away." I called the police and filed a report. When the officer asked if I had any suspects, I mentioned the ongoing dispute with the HOA but didn't name Patricia specifically. I did, however, mention my security cameras. "You have cameras?" The officer perked up. "At my house and at the commercial lot I own," I confirmed. I installed them after the problems with the HOA started. We reviewed the footage from my home security system. At 2:17 a.m., a figure in dark clothing and a hoodie had approached my truck. The face wasn't clearly visible, but the build and gait were familiar. "Can't positively ID the suspect from this," the officer said, "but it's enough to continue investigating." Later that day, the police called to inform me that they had questioned Patricia Wilson based on the security footage and her known dispute with me. While she had denied any involvement, they had noticed fresh scratches on her hands consistent with the type that might occur while keying a vehicle. The district attorney's office was reviewing the case for possible charges of criminal mischief and vandalism. The following week brought a flurry of developments. The independent audit of the HOA finances revealed that Patricia had indeed been steering contracts to family members and receiving kickbacks. The total amount misappropriated over 5 years exceeded $75,000. The board voted to remove Patricia from her position permanently and referred the matter to the county prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges. Meanwhile, the police had gathered enough evidence to charge her with vandalism of my truck. At the emergency community meeting called to address the situation, I was surprised when James Foster nominated me to fill the vacant board position. "We need someone with the courage to stand up for what's right," he said, "and someone who understands property rights and management." Despite my initial reluctance, the overwhelming support from my neighbors convinced me to accept the position temporarily, at least until the next regular election. As the meeting concluded, Margaret approached me with an ironic smile. "So, from HOA enemy to HOA board member in less than 3 months. That must be some kind of record," I laughed. "Not exactly what I had planned when I bought that parking lot." "Speaking of which," she said, "what are your plans for it now?" I considered the question. "I think I'll honor our original agreement. The HOA can manage the registration process for residents and a portion will be set aside for overflow parking. The gate stays, but access will be reasonable." "Fair enough," Margaret nodded. "And Patricia?" The criminal case against Patricia Wilson moved forward quickly. Faced with overwhelming evidence of both the vandalism and the financial misconduct, she agreed to a plea deal that included restitution to the HOA, community service, and probation. As part of the agreement, she and her husband sold their house and moved away from Meadowbrook Estates. The day their moving truck pulled out, several neighbors gathered in their driveways, not to say goodbye, but simply to witness the end of an era. Martin Kelly, the retired professor who had first congratulated me for standing up to Patricia, brought over a 6-pack of beer that evening. To the man who owned the parking lot and brought down a tyrant, he toasted as we sat on my front porch. I shook my head. I never intended to cause such chaos. I just wanted to park my truck without harassment. Sometimes it takes someone new to see what everyone else has grown accustomed to, Martin mused. The rest of us had been under Patricia's thumb for so long, we'd forgotten we could stand up for ourselves. 6 months later, Meadowbrook Estates had transformed. Under the new board's leadership, including my temporary role, we revised many of the most restrictive HOA regulations, implemented transparent financial practices, and created a community dispute resolution process that prevented minor issues from escalating. The commercial parking lot that had started it all became a symbol of the new Meadowbrook. With my permission, the community held its first ever block party there, complete with food trucks, games for kids, and plenty of neighborly bonding. As I watched children racing around with glow sticks in the twilight, Margaret came to stand beside me. "You know," she said, "when you first put up that gate, half the neighborhood thought you were just another difficult resident looking to cause trouble." I smiled. "And the other half?" "The other half was secretly cheering you on, hoping someone would finally stand up to Patricia." She paused. "Do you ever regret buying this place, knowing all the drama it would cause?" I looked around at the vibrant community, gathering people laughing, sharing food, forming new friendships, all on the asphalt lot that had once been at the center of so much conflict. "Not for a second," I said truthfully. "Besides, how many people can say they owned an entire parking lot just to spite their HOA?" Margaret laughed. "Only you, Ian. Only you." As the party continued into the evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. What had begun as a simple parking dispute had exposed corruption, ended a petty dictatorship, and ultimately strengthened an entire community. And it all started because an HOA Karen told me I couldn't park in my own driveway, never realizing I owned the very lot she tried to banish me to. Sometimes, justice finds its own parking spot.